Sam Ray Mosley. I was born right here in New Albany, Mississippi, March 30th, 1946. My father was named Joe E. Mosley, and my mother's name was Ella B. Mosley. My parents were both born in Union County, Mississippi. My sister, the oldest, her name was Annie B. Pratt. She was a Mosley in the beginning. My older brother was Joe Mosley. My next brother was Willie Hayes' brother. Willie Hayes Mosley. Ralph Mosley, Jamie Mosley, and then me, Sam R. Mosley. I'm the only one left. I actually grew up in the New Albany area. I was born, you know where Pleasant Hill Church is? Back out there on a place called the Bennett's Farm. That's where I was born at.
Do you know who delivered you?
As a matter of fact, I do, Dr. Easom. And I was the first child in my family born in a hospital. You know, there was a hospital right downtown on the corner. It's a lawyer's office there now. But right there up on that hill was the New Albany Hospital. I grew up in different sections. My early years was out on the Bennett's Farm, out near Pleasant Hill. And then we moved to New Albany over by Beaver Dam Church. And from there we moved to town, where I live at now, on the north side of town, over on Williams Street. Well, I had, my uncle lived up the road. The Paytons lived across the road. And I had another auntie lived up a little further up the road. Had one of our ministers, Mr. Vincent, lived up the road. So it was a pretty tight community up there at the Beaver Dam area. My brother that was next to me, he was 4 years older than me. Now the older ones were like 2 years apart. My oldest brother was 10 years older than me. We were what you call sharecroppers. We lived on the Bennett's Farm, Homer Bennett, out in the Pleasant Hill area. You go up the hill and around the curve and keep going all the way up to Pleasant Hill. You come right face to face with Pleasant Hill Church. And then you turn left and go down the hill and around the corner. That's the community that I was born and raised at. Beaver Dam straight up old Highway 15. I was probably about 8 or 10. Well, back in those days, you know, we went to school in churches. You know, everything was segregated in those days. So the black children went to school in churches. So Beaver Dam was my church, and it was also my school. My goodness. The whole community went there. Probably, I'd say altogether probably around 100. School for us started at pre-primer, primer, then first grade. So that's what they called it in the black community.
Primer.
Pre-primer and primer. Well, you know what? I did get a little early start because the lady whose place, the Bennett's Farm that we lived on, she used to get magazines, and my mother kept house for her family. And of course, she had some smaller children, and I was the smallest one in my family. So my mother didn't let me go to the fields or nothing. She kept me at the house, also at the big house. You know, when you get magazines through the mail and stuff like that, after so long, you know, they just get rid of them. I would take the ones that she got rid of, and that's how I learned to read. The older ones did go to school there, you know, most of them until 8th grade. And see, once they got 8th grade, everybody was moving north, getting out of the south.
Did your siblings go north?
Yes, every one of them.
Did they ever come back?
Eventually, they came back. You know, nothing was down here but agriculture. They had some plants down here at that time, but they wasn't hiring African Americans at that time. Most of them went about 14 to 15 and older, up until, you know, 17, 18, like that. Back in the day, the older generation, well, you see, they got tired of just doing agriculture stuff and in the fields and all that kind of stuff. So they went north where they could find factory jobs and make good money. So most of them left and went north. They took a train from right downtown New Albany. That's how they left. They ended up in, well, most of them ended up in Peoria, Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, up in that area. Racine, Wisconsin. My mother was a little apprehensive, you know, about you know how a mother is about her children. Because, see, most of them were still teenagers when they left. But she could deal with it because they went to areas where we had relatives there, and which made it a little bit easier for my mother.
Did your siblings all find good jobs up there and
They did.
better lives?
They did.
Did they ever try to get you to move up there?
Well, I did at one time move up there, but see, back in those days, none of my other siblings finished high school, and my mother really wanted me to finish high school. So I came back. I went to school up there probably one semester, but I came back home and finished my education here in New Albany. In the beginning, they were sharecroppers, farmers, ordinary, good religious people. We went to church every Sunday, and family-oriented, just good people. My grandfather, the latest one that was living, he died in 1930. I think it was 1936. On my father's side, on the Mosley side, I had my grandparents, but they all died before I was born. On my mother's side, which was the Fords, I had a chance to spend time with them because I was like a teenager before most of them passed away. They lived in the area out, you know where Pumpkin Center is?
I do.
Over out in that area.
Where did you grow up in church?
Beaver Dam. Reverend Vinzant was there. We had Reverend Ison Brown was there also as our teacher. The church had a piano in it. And most churches did have a piano back in those days. And there was always a lady, a gentleman there that could play the piano while the church choir sang. But what really piqued my interest when you ever heard the name of Leon Pinson?
Yes.
Occasionally he would come up and put a program on, and of course he played the guitar. And so when he'd take a break sometime, we'd sneak in there and mess around with his guitar. We had the people that lived in the house before we moved in it had a what they call a player piano. You know, the kind that you could work your feet and the air would go through the piano, and it could play by itself certain tunes that was on, like it was almost like a pasteboard type music thing that went circular, and it would play music. We had one of those. My brother was the one that really played the piano, and I got into playing the guitar.
Which brother was that?
Jamie.
Did you have a guitar at home then?
I did. Actually, it was my father's guitar, but once he saw that I was interested in learning to play it, he let me play it. Well, see, my father and my brothers, they had what they call a minstrel type group. My uncle played the banjo. There was three of them. My uncle played the banjo, another uncle played the guitar, and my father played the, I can't think of the name of it right now. They played what they call minstrel type music. You ever see that movie, Roots?
Yes.
You know, when they was playing music out there and dancing?
Yes.
That type music is what they played.
Okay.
That was minstrel type music. Celebrating and dancing, family gathering,
Okay.
that sort of thing. Well, we'd get together probably once or twice a year. But back in those days, we had a lot of gatherings at the church, because we had what we call dinner on the ground. That was a big thing up at our church, you know. Families would bring different dishes and things like that. And my dad and them would play music and just have a good time. Most of the times, it would be on Sunday afternoons after church. The church people came to the church that was closest to them. So everybody in our area came to Beaver Dam. And all the families would bring a favorite dish. A lot of the ladies had special dishes that they could prepare that nobody else could make it quite like they did. Like banana pudding and coconut cakes and chocolate cakes, caramel cakes. And so everybody had a specialty. And so we'd try to get a little piece of the different kind of cakes that they would lay out. What they wanted to do was make sure that all the children got something and tasted some of each one of them, you know. Because, you know, some of them could make certain things better than others. And so and they knew how to cut it up so you could get you a little piece of whichever one that you wanted.
What was your mom's specialty?
Well, she was she did a good job on the pineapple cakes. I love that. And it's a lady still living today that was in that group that she don't make them anymore. She may make some for her family. Miss Smith, she still lives back up in that area. She's in her 90s, but she could make some of the best pineapple cakes. I did sing in church and played some music in church. You got to understand, back in those days, there was a certain group of people in the church. I don't think they meant anything by it, but it was just the way all of us were raised up. See, rock and roll music and rhythm and blues type music, some people call it the devil's music. When Elvis Presley started out singing in the 50s, they burned a lot of his records because they said it was the devil's music. We were mostly playing church music, but what happened was, when we saw Elvis, we saw Chuck Berry, B.B. King, and it was all kind of musicians that was coming up that played guitars and things like that with a whole different twist to it, which was exciting to us young people. We see them in the record stores. They had records, albums, what they call them back in the day, and they would occasionally get on TV, because they had a TV show that came on Saturday nights at midnight, where they would have those kind of artists on, and we got to see them at that time.
You had a TV at home?
Yes. We didn't always have one.
How old were you when you got a TV?
Probably about 10, something like that, about 10, 9 or 10 years old. It was a pass-me-down TV, but it worked. It needs some fixing to it, but I still got the piano. See, I had a relative that owned the house, and my auntie had lived in the house prior to us moving in, but my auntie ended up buying a house for herself, and then she told us if we wanted to move to town, we could move into a house that she was fixing to move out of, and that's what we did. The same house I live in to this day. Yeah, after that, wasn't nobody left but my brother that was next to me, because my other brothers, they were older, and they had married and moved away. Those relatives of ours that had already moved to Detroit, Chicago, Peoria, and places like that, they would always reach back and get relatives from down here to come up there where they were, and they would let those young ones stay with them till they got a job and a place of their own. So that's how they, part of the big migration back in the 40s to the north. The house we moved in, our neighbor was white people. Over across the street, there were more white people. On down the street, there were black people. It was like an integrated type area, even back then in the late 50s. Back in those days, there were sections all over town where black folks lived at. See, there was 3 or 4, maybe 5 areas that black folks lived in. course, one of them is still kind of like that now over, you know where Steve Quarters is?
Yes. Over here by Union Lumber Company?
Mm-hmm. That was mostly black folks in that area. And then the flat all around the corner, it's still black folks down there. You know, when you go past the compress?
Yes.
In that little area right there, and around the corner there, that was mostly black folks. I would go straight up North Street, and I would go up the hill, and it was a neighborhood right up the hill there that mostly black folks stayed. And if you keep going, you can go down to the bottom of the hill and go across the railroad track, and a place called Ghost City. And you could go up through there and come up to the main highway and go around that way to get to school. That's the way I went to school from the north side every day. You can't access it now like you used to, but it's right on the other side of the school that's over there. Anyway, you could keep going straight towards the railroad track, and you go down the hill there and cross the railroad track and come up the hill on the other side, and you would be on the main street coming through town. Mm-hmm. Ghost City was what you went through to get to the main street. If you go by that muffler place and keep going like behind it, mm-hmm. well, you go up the hill, then you go down by the railroad, and that was Ghost City. Okay. When you get across the railroad, and you come up the hill and come up to the main highway. They had goats down there that they used for milk for children, and they had goats down there that kept the grass down.
Whose goats were they?
You know, I never did know. I just figured it was the people that lived in that area. The people that owned the goats, they had the goats because the goats kept the grass and all that stuff trimmed down, see. You know, people were resilient back in those days. They figured out how to do things. They didn't have to mow or any of that kind of stuff. They just put the goats out there and tie them up. They'd eat until they get that cleaned, and then they'd move them to another spot. It was a church, and it was broken up in like 4 sections, but it all looked the same. And one teacher had 2 sections. It'd be two teachers was there, and so you know they just go from one section to another section, and the kids would be getting their lesson at the one they left. You know, they had it figured out, and it worked. The old school up on the hill there, basically inside looks like it looked when I started the school down there. Now the lower portion was built later, like I think about the early 60s. All that lower, when all the counties consolidated. See, we had known some of them because we played sports against some of the county schools. And, you know, we got to know a lot of the boys that played sports and a lot of the girls too. Because all of us at one time or another would end up going to church together at different places. I always did quite well in school. I never did find school hard. I love school. I love learning. To this day, I read the paper every day. things like that. I read magazines. I look at programs on TV or what's going on around the world, in the United States. I've always had that curiosity about what's going on. One of my ambitions was to be a school teacher. That's what I always wanted to be. But I got sidetracked, and before I could go to college to be a school teacher, I got called in the service. That's back when they had the draft in the early 60s. Once you finish high school, find a job somewhere. Find something to do to earn money. So I started working, and also I started playing music too, where I made money on the side. First job I got was at Merchant's Truck Line. I wasn't a truck driver. I was a loader. They had product coming in from different places, and then we'd have to unload it, store it, and then when trucks was going out to make deliveries, we had to load it back up. Had a load sheet, and we'd pick it up and put it up and load the trailers, and I did that for several years. I did my basic training there at Fort Polk, Louisiana.
When you got drafted, had you already started touring with your music?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
So you had already been on the road.
I had.
Was that kind of a weekend thing?
Mostly it was a weekend thing in those days. But we had landed a gig out in Oklahoma where it was near Fort Sill Army Base. So it was one of those places where you could play 4 or 5 nights a week, and which was cool.
Did you ever get to go out there and play, or did you get drafted before you could do that?
No, I was playing the music out there before I got drafted.
Okay. How many years did you serve?
2 years. That was the normal length of time that you served when you got drafted back in the day. Was 2 years. They'd offer you money to stay another year or two, but I didn't want that. So I just got on out. When I came back from Vietnam, there weren't many choices. I always wanted to, like I said, I wanted to be a teacher. And so when we got back from Vietnam, there always was the GI Bill, but it was set up back in the day where you could only get like 18 months to maybe 2 years of schooling. That's all the government would pay for. So anyway, I took advantage of that and enrolled in Northeast Community College.
You played football there?
I did, which was a big help. I could take my money from the VA and use it for other things. So that worked out real well. The folks that I had been playing with before I left, most of them had relocated up north in different places. And so I started back then putting another group together. And so that was back. Bob was in the service when I got out. And so I had this group that I was working with here in town. And then when he got out, he came over and we started playing together. And see, they passed during that time. They were upgrading the GI Bill so that you could have more time to go to school if you chose to. I graduated from Northeast first, and then I wanted to continue my education, and during that period, they initiated more time that you could get like at Ole Miss. And so I went down there and checked on it, and they told me, said, well, you got 18 months of eligibility left that you could go to school down here at Ole Miss. But once I got started, the government kept extending how much GI Bill that we could get. So I ended up graduating from Ole Miss because I stayed down. It took another almost 3 years because when I first started to school, it was a complete course at Northeast that you graduated. But then when the bill came through that we had more money, well, I decided to go on and go back to school. I went to Ole Miss and enrolled in the business school. But you know what? There was always nice people. Wherever I went, there was a lady at Ole Miss told me and Bob, say, y'all come to summer school, enroll in summer school, keep your grades up, and we might can help you get in the fall. And so that's what we did. Of course, Bob got married and he wanted to do other things, but I still was interested in school. I graduated in 70, I'm thinking it was 73, if I'm not mistaken. I had a friend that was in the music business in the Tupelo area that I played music for before I went into service. And so anyway, he always told me, said, now, whenever you get out of school, so you come back and we'll fix something up. So when I got out of service, I went back down to him and I told him what my plans were. So he told me, so I'll tell you what. He said, you can play down here they had musicians playing, but he let me play down there twice a month and to help me pay for my college training at Ole Miss. So I was able to play music on the weekend and go to Ole Miss. There were always people that I had been associated with that took an interest in me and helped me out by, just like I could play at his place twice a month and earn money for going to school and play other places too, see.
Do you remember the name of his club?
The Cotton Patch.
That was in Tupelo?
Mm-hmm. And the club was right in the middle of a cotton patch. Sure was. I love to read, I love to study, and I love to learn. So when I got to town school, it just was not difficult for me. So I did quite well in high school, in grade school. when I moved to town and started going to school at UCTS. One of the first ones that I made was Bob, the fella that sang with me all them years. He turned out to be my best friend, and I made friends with everybody I ran into. You know, back in those days, when somebody new came in from a different school, a different area, if one person took you under their wings, then everybody else fell in line as one of the guys. See, so I fell in pretty quickly with the group. I played football and basketball in high school. That was in the early '60s. It was nearing the end of football there, but it went on a few more years. But I played football until I graduated from B.F. Ford, and basketball.
What year did you graduate from B.F. Ford?
1964. When I wasn't playing somewhere, we used to have things it was a building called the Shop there at B.F. Ford, Union County Training School, and we would have what we call socials, and that was just somebody spinning records and paying a little admission at the door, 25 cents or 50 cents or something like that, and you'd be raising money for the class trip. The school was big on every year taking the juniors and seniors and take them on a class trip so they could see things and learn what it was like for people that lived in other places.
Did you go on the class trip?
I did. Matter of fact, I went on 2 of them. See, everybody didn't have enough money to make those trips. We raised money through the year in order to get enough money to pay for the bus, the lodging, and all of that. But some of the kids still had issues with even that, because a lot of them still had to go back to the fields and work, you know.
How did you get to go both years?
Well, the first year I went was in 1963. I had friends in the class of '63, and everybody in the class of '63 didn't go on the trip. So when space came available, they would ask if any of us, the juniors, would like to take a seat, and so I got a seat.
So if you had the money to pay for your spot, you could go.
I did, and that's the way it was.
How did you have the money?
Well, see, I always did something to make money. I was playing music then on the weekends. So, you know, I don't know how to say this other than just say it, but I don't remember being without money, because there was ladies in the neighborhood that needed things done at their yards and at their house. Whatever was needed to do that I could do, I would do it. And of course they'd pay me. Wasn't a lot of money, you know, maybe $1.50, 50 cents, whatever it was. And did you know that when I graduated, some of them same people gave me $20, $30, $40, $50. I always minded my manners around what we call grown folks, you know, and adults, because that's the way I was raised. You know, none of this bad language and things like that. So I got along quite well with uh, really just about everybody I ran into. My mother passed away in 1963. She passed away young. She wasn't 50 years old when she passed away. You know, back in those days, there were some things that the doctors never did figure out how to treat. And she ended up with what they call varicose veins problems. Well, there were plenty of people that did die from complications from it, you know. And my mother was one of them. And she died when she was 50. But, because she never would stop housework at the house, none of that, you know. She made sure we always had something to eat when we came home, and the house was clean, you know. We said, Mama, let us do this. But you know how a woman is with a house. And so, but anyway, she lived to be 50. She had a good life. She had a good life. And she trained us all well. You know, like some of these young folks now, they'll be cussing and carrying on, and they don't care whether there's old ladies or young children. In our coming up days, we didn't do that. We didn't do that. I guess you would call him a authoritarian. He believed in you acting right. That's what he'd say. Acting right. You know, he didn't go for that cutting up stuff. See, back then, if you cut up, I could be on the other side of town. And if any of us cut up over there, word would get back across town to my mom and dad and them before I got home. And so I learned pretty quickly. Watch your mouth, don't follow the crowd, and just be respectful. And that's carried me a long way. I take a lot of pride in that. Daddy lived to be 60, I think he lived to be 66. He didn't live a real long time, but he lived to be 66. He was in agriculture, working the fields and all that kind of stuff. But when he moved to town, he had a friend that got him a job on the city. And so he got a job actually he was a driver on the trash truck. He held that job till he retired. Believe it or not, about 50 years ago, her name is Margaret. She's a beautician. She got her own shop there at the back of the house, and she's been running that really ever since we got married. I got a daughter that's in the same business. She's 50 years old, and my wife kind of backing away from it, and we turning most of it over to our daughter. You know, you pass things on if you can, you know, to your family. Let them learn a trade, and so anyway, that's what we're doing there, and our daughter got a good business back there, and so my wife still goes back there and got certain customers that she takes care of. I got a son that works every day, and I got another daughter. She works every day. And one other daughter that's married, she works down in Jackson, Mississippi. So all of them are either married and doing well and working. I got one grandson. I think he's 30, 31, 32 now. We raised him. He plays Canadian football, and he also got another job he does. So he's doing quite well for himself. There were some businesses in down by the compress. You ever heard of Bud Turner's Cafe?
I've heard you talk about it.
Oh, okay. Well, see, that was the main thing that we had going down there was Bud Turner's Cafe. And then the other place was, where that building I got across the tracks over there? See, that area right there was full of black businesses back in the day. And so a lot of people, when they came to town, that's where they congregated at. You probably heard the term cross the tracks. Well, that's real. And most any city back in the day that you went to, there was a section across the track that black folk congregated at. And but it was really fascinating place over there because they had movie theaters over there. They had barber shops, shoe repair places, restaurants, and the building that I owned over there was one of those businesses back in the day. I got some of the same stews sitting at the same bar in that same building. So I just decided I didn't want to change anything. When I was real young, it was about the time when they were winding it down. See, at one time, everything was segregated. And then back in the day, they started integrating the movie theaters downtown. There was a movie theater right there next to the Bank of New Albany, right there on that corner. It was segregated. White folks went through the front door, and the black folks went around the side up to the balcony, and we sat in half of the balcony, and white folks could sit in one half of the balcony, and they had all of the floor seats. From the street, you go down the side of the building, and when you get to the back of the building, they had a stairway take you up to the balcony.
Was the stairway on the outside?
Mm-hmm. It would be on the right side if you're looking from the street. There was another theater on the other end of town close to the bridge down there. I did my first concert, Bud Turner's Cafe. But see, back in the day, that was the place on Saturday afternoons where one of the places where black folks went was Bud Turner's Cafe. Because he was a really good cook. And he cooked food like black folks like it. And he could do it. He did it himself too. He had other people helping him, but every place like that had a jukebox. You put a nickel or a dime or a quarter or something in it, and punch what you want to hear. I never went to school with any white students until I went to college. When you're in a war zone, there are no colors between the soldiers. That's a quick way to get you hurt. You put on that green camouflage outfit and you're a soldier. The students act the same. To me, you know, most of them have fun and do crazy things and all kinds of stuff, which is not uncommon for people in college. And I actually enjoyed it because, see, I was much older than the rest of my class when I started at Northeast. I was a veteran, ex-veteran, but I enjoyed being around them, just looking at them and how they did things, and just how far our country had moved in a good way from the time I was drafted, see. To come out and go through wars, go through segregation, and go through a lot of the ugly things. But when it got to, I had been a soldier in the war and all that, and when I got to Northeast, that's the first time I'd went to school with any white at any age. And I'm a grown man at that time, you know. I've heard all my life that if you let the children leave them alone, they'll play together with no issues. It's us grown folks would have the issues a lot of times, you know. Not all of us, but some of us. Life is too short to worry about things like that. Because when we was in the service and we was in Vietnam, that camouflage outfit that we had on, that's the only thing that the enemy looked at. He didn't care what shade your color was under there. If you didn't get down, you got a bullet. A lot of us have to experience things like that and to get a good understanding of, you know, what makes the world go around. And I have no time for things to me that don't make sense. Live, let live, be respectful to everybody you meet. That's the way I see it. Whether they don't reciprocate, that's okay. That's okay. Go on about your business. I've made it 75 years living that way. I don't know how many more I got, but I'm not changing. My grandson, sometime he's 4 years old, I'll speak to somebody and he'll wait till they go and say, "Papa, do you know them?" I said, "No." He gets so tickled because I speak to everybody like I know them, you know. And so when he's with me sometime, you know, I say, "Hey, how you doing?" And he'll say, "How you doing too?" It don't hurt no one, so how you doing today? You keep on stepping.